You can now follow me on all my social media platforms to find out who my latest guest will be. And don't forget to click the subscribe button and the notifications button so you're notified for when my next podcast goes live.
With predators, what they'll do is, and this has a flip side, because you'll have a predator that likes boys 7 to 10. When that boy reaches 10 and their development and they're moving on, then predators will literally, what they'll do is they'll hold on to that 10-year-old because they've worked hard to break down the barriers of that child. And then what they'll do is they'll use him to facilitate younger boys to come in. And there were certain predators that I were with that just wanted to get so close that they could potentially sort of like smell that child. Do you know what I mean? Because that's what really excited them. You save one child, then it becomes an obsession. You want to save more. Do you know what I mean? You feel as though, well, hold on a minute. I've been in the most horrendous situation. I know I can do this. Do you know what I mean? And that's what keeps you going. I befriended somebody and we eventually moved into a particular network. And when we moved into this network, on the day that I met these people for the very first time, and there were 6 of them, they brought a 12-year-old boy into the flat and they wanted me to have sex with that boy. That's where the pressure is like, it's through the roof, James. It's through the roof because I've got 6 predators there who are absolutely, they've gone. Do you know what I mean? They're sexually sort of so perverse and active. We'd spent 6 hours looking at all these sort of child images. The computer's a wash of material. I've got evidence all over the floor and all this sort of stuff. And yet at the end of the day, I've got to hold this boy and I've got to protect this boy. I can't take back, sadly, I can't take back what's happened to the boy previously. Do you know what I mean? It's the here and the now. All I know is that whilst I'm here, no one's going to touch him and that he's safe. I don't think you're going to stop it. And I don't think it's something that, you're going to say, do you know what, we're going to wipe this all out and it's never going to happen again. It's a bad dream. But it isn't. It's going to be there and it will be there for life, forever.
Boom, we're on.
Right.
Today's guest, we've got Ian James. How are you, Ian?
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
I've done over 200 podcasts, Ian, and this one is probably one of the darkest. Like, you were released a book called Save a Child. You were an undercover paedophile where you worked undercover to catch paedophiles. You had to become one to catch them. You've helped potentially save 100 kids' lives. You've put so many different people in prison. Yes, it's a dark job to many, but if it wasn't for you, you wouldn't be able to help save those innocent kids. But first and foremost, how are you, Ian?
I'm fine. I'm okay. Obviously, that time has gone. Do you know what I mean? So I'm doing other stuff now. But yeah, it's a very, you're right. It's a very dark subject. But hopefully we can still learn from things that have gone on in the past. And I do think that at the end of the day, it's all about sort of education and awareness. So parents being aware of that there are people out there, sadly, who want to abuse their children.
Yeah, that's a sad thing. And I think back in the day, maybe 10, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I think a lot of this stuff was kind of swept under the carpet. But now a lot of people are coming forward, and it seems to be rife just now that how much frequently this actually goes on. Like, people might be oblivious to it because it's never really happened to them or their kids. But as you know, you were at the forefront and you know how dangerous it is out there.
Yeah, I think 20 years ago, it was a subject that no one really wanted to talk about. And if it didn't affect your child, then it didn't, you know what I mean? You just left it alone. I think as time's gone on, and I think certain high profile cases have really helped potentially victims coming forward and speaking, and agencies and organisations working together to save children. Do you know what I mean? So I do think that socially now, people are a little bit more aware, but still there's that complacency of, well, it's not going to happen to us. So I think, 20 years ago, no one would talk about it, and it would be very difficult. And I think the legislation showed it, because the legislation wasn't there to properly deal with the problem. Whereas sort of 2003 onwards, you've got the Sexual Offences Act, which covers a wide range of offences, and goes a long way to trying to catch these people.
Yeah. Always go back to the start of my guest, Ian. where you grew up and how it all began.
Okay, so I was born in Cornwall, and lived in a little village outside Penzance. So you can't get further southwest. It's right down. I think it's about 16 miles from Land's End. So you're right down the bottom. Went to primary school and secondary modern school, and then sort of Cornwall's at that time in the 60s and 70s. It was a place where tin mining was still going. You had your tourism. So for opportunities to do work outside of that, as well as the fishing industry, I decided to move away and join the police. And it's a big step because you're sort of like very much in your sort of environment of the West Country in Cornwall, and you're like in this bubble. And then suddenly I go to London and it's like the big wide world. So I went there as a cadet. Because of my age of 18, I sort of I went on a short cadetship and then joined the police. And then literally that's it. I just stayed in the police, in the Met, for about sort of just over 10 years, bordering on, like 12 years. And then from there, I then moved up to Cleveland Police.
What was it like going into the police for the first time?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, because from a discipline point of view, even I always go back to something that happened to me when I joined the police, and you go to the barbers and you get your hair cut, and but it's not a normal barbers; it's a barbers that just cut police officers or new recruits' hair, and it was a case of sitting in the chair, and I just went, "Can I have a bit off here and a bit off there?" And it just went, and it was just short hair. That was a shock because I never really had short hair before. But yeah, it's when I joined in the late 70s, so it was 1978 when I joined. There was still a lot of importance of you're joining the police, so you must know the difference between right and wrong. You're going to be tested at various times. It was a multicultural sort of environment, and when I went to Stoke Newington, it was basically 95% Black Afro-Caribbean, and the rest was a mixture of sort of the Asian community, the Irish. And it's a massive culture shock.
What kind of crimes were you doing? What kind of criminals were you catching back then?
It was your street robbers, your pickpockets, your burglars. And then as I escalated within the sort of the CID world, we were dealing with rapes, sexual assaults, robberies and stuff like that, yeah.
How hard is it to see all that kind of going through your first few years? Does that affect you straight away, or do you kind of get used to it?
I think you get used to it. It's like when you see your first dead body, it's a bit of a shock. But then, sadly at Stoke Newington, there was quite a lot of murders over a period of time. So you were regularly seeing dead bodies. And you sort of come accustomed to it. You sort of switch off, even though you have your empathy, but you tend to switch off because that's how you have to deal with that sort of grief.
You become cold then towards the world?
Your personality changes a little bit, I think, because again, you're trying to sort of be a professional and deal with what you've got to deal with. Sadly, the person dies. Sometimes it can be quite horrific because it could be a fire, or it could be a stabbing. But they're both quite severe.
Was there much counselling and stuff back in the 70s and 80s for police officers? I don't think it was as
no. If I'm being honest, no, I don't think there was. There wasn't any sort of counselling or support as such. I think it was a case of
deal with it.
You had to deal with it. Mm-hmm. You would talk to your colleagues, and you would chat about probably your experiences that you've had, and that was a way of overcoming potential some issues. I think as time went on, then there was a total mindset of do you know what? Professional people can be affected by grief.
Were you going down, see once you started moving through the ranks, because you're very well respected in the police force, see when you started moving down the ranks, did you have a certain path you wanted to choose, or did everything just kind of fall into your place?
I didn't, if I'm being honest, I didn't like traffic, and I wasn't really involved. I didn't like being involved in traffic offences and stuff like that. So I was very much keen on the CID world, the criminal the criminal world. Do you know what I mean? I like being involved and trying to, like track down robbers and people that rob on the street and burglars and stuff like that. That was the crime is what I liked. I sort of enjoyed that sort of environment, really.
Were you undercover before you went into the undercover
No,
paedophile kind of world?
no, I didn't. I sort of, my undercover world started sort of like in 1990. That's when it sort of really started to take shape and take off. And that was because I went into a particular department when I moved up north to Cleveland. And I joined a squad, and from there, that's how I developed my sort of undercover skills there, yeah. But I was quite fortunate that I would say I was very fortunate to work in the West End of London. So I policed Soho, Oxford Street, Regent Street, but Soho in particular, that's a real eye-opener, from a sexual point of view and for all the things that were going on in the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah, a lot of drugs, prostitution.
A lot of prostitution. You got your homosexual sort of like environment where you had they were known as rent boys at the time. They had all sorts of vulnerabilities. Do you know what I mean? But they weren't viewed as vulnerable, sadly, at that time. So that environment sort of stood me in good stead for later when I went into this dark world, because that definitely sort of helped me to deal with certain issues, especially in the sort of overt homosexual scene where it can be quite like full on.
Yeah. What about informants? Did I read that you used to work with a lot of informants?
Yeah. Like anything, as a good detective, you'd always try to sort of build up a working relationship with informants, and yeah, I sort of had some reasonable results. And these people, yes, they were criminals, but they decided to give some information. Yeah, it's I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that side of it. I think the whole thing of being a detective, that back in the day, that's what it was all about. It was about running informants, sort of like you're very much on a line, but you're not crossing the line, and that's where you sort of focus your attention. And I was fortunate enough to be a detective in Plaistow in East London, which again was a very good sort of like working ground for building up that relationship as a detective and experience.
See, for an informant, do they still get to give you information but get away with what they're doing themselves?
No, because at the end of the day, they knew that, if they've been involved in stuff, then that's not a green light that they get away with stuff. Do you know what I mean? So, and it's a difficult one, it's a difficult one because at the end of the day, you're not really knowing what they're doing, but they know that, if they get caught, they get caught.
How do you befriend an informant? Is it catching them and then talking to them in the station, or do they come to you?
Various ways. They might just pick the phone up and phone, and then you just pick the phone up, and it's just by pure luck that you hit off. Do you know what I mean? It's just by pure luck. Or they might have been arrested or whatever. So there's all sorts of, but having said that, there's all sorts of reasons why informants will talk. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah.
Do you lose respect for people like that, or do you try and nourish them to say that they're doing a good job? What's your mindset get into that kind of world?
I think, I suppose in a way, it builds your credibility up as a detective because you might have some informants, and come with that, there's jealousies because people will think, oh, he's got a couple of informants and one thing and another. Do you know what I mean? So I used to view it as like it was part of being a detective in that time. I mean, it's totally changed now because obviously there are particular units that deal with it. So it's taken away from a detective in the normal office. But in the normal office, you were part of being a detective was that you had to go out there, you had to meet people, you had to talk to people, get your face known around the area. And then eventually sort of like if people come across and want to give you information, then you've got to like look after that information and protect them and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, they say there's no honour amongst thieves, but back in the 70s, 80s, they said that it was like a code where nobody snitches kind of get put in ditches. But nowadays it's like there's probably more informants than police officers now. Like, did you see a massive shift from 70s, 80s? Was it harder to get an informant in the 80s when it would be now, or is it just the same?
Well, I mean, my sort of dealing with informants finished sort of round about, I would suggest, about 2006, potentially. That's when I finished. But I would say that when you go back on or about thieves, there was the old school criminal very much was they didn't like drugs. They didn't like to get involved in drugs. But yet they were quite happy probably to have a shotgun and go across the pavement and rob a bank. But when it came to drugs, they didn't have that. I think in time they suddenly realised that it was probably easier to make money in drugs than what it was like doing your armed robberies and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it sort of shifted because the money was bigger.
So in the 90s then, were you enjoying your job? Were you loving it? There was no stresses? You were happy catching drug dealers, murderers?
Yeah. I mean, when I moved into, I moved up north to Cleveland, and with Judy, my wife, and 2 children. We started, and it was great. And then I moved into what was known as the Regional Crime Squad at that time, and that's when I sort of got really introduced to the undercover element of it. And then, like I've mentioned in the book, I met up with somebody who I've known for a long time, and I knew was an undercover officer, but I didn't really know what he specialised in, and he was the one that introduced me into this dark world. So.
And that was the first time you went undercover, when you went into the dark side of it?
No. When I first went in, I did just sort of normal drugs, guns, and
What was that like?
Yeah, it was good. It was okay. I enjoyed it. I mean, it's exhilarating to be sort of like, as a criminal, you're in amongst them all, and they get caught and one thing and another. So yeah, I enjoyed it. But where I really got a lot of good satisfaction is when I went into the dark world. That's when I really sort of, because I had to work so hard to be accepted. Not that I didn't have to work hard in the other stuff, but with this is a total different ballgame.
Who do you think it's easier to manipulate, kind of the criminal, like drug dealers, murderers, or paedophiles? Who is it harder to be accepted into?
Definitely the predators, child sex offenders.
Yeah,
without
why
a
was
shadow.
that?
I think because they've got a lot to lose. They're very cautious. They're very suspicious. They're very suspicious because they don't necessarily think you're a police officer. They're more likely to think you're a journalist, and they're gonna be named and shamed. That type of thing. So they're quite insular, and sometimes what you've got to do is you've got to sort of manipulate them to sort of be accepted, and it's so difficult because you'll only have a small window of opportunity to do it, and then if you're not successful, then theoretically you're finished because you can't go back in. Do you know what I mean? So there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure to sort of research him. It was mainly males I was up against. But you're researching these males, and you've got to identify, well, where am I going to meet them? Am I going to meet them on a bus? Am I going to meet them in a cafe? And then what am I going to do? Because it's all about your communicational skill, and it's all about sort of trying to quickly get a hook where they're going to speak to you. And it might be 3 months down the line where you actually talk about stuff that you don't want to talk about. Do you know what I mean? And so, it's just like I can't go up to you, James, in the street and say, hi, my name's Ian, I'm a paedophile, because it doesn't work that way. So it's that very drip sort of like way that you would do it.
Mm-hmm. So you've went from 2 new kids, wife, pretty decent job, undercover, catching criminals, and then an offer comes to you. What was going through your mind then when you said, look, you want to go into this dark world where to try and catch paedophiles, save children? Did you question it, or did you just accept straight away?
It's a big thing. And I think certainly in the undercover world, you were always told that you would never tell your partner or wife what you were doing. And it was more of a safety mechanism. But in this world, it's really different, and I felt that if I was going to go into this sort of arena, then Julie had a right to know what I was going to be doing, potentially. Because I think it's important, because there would be dark days. There would be days where, like it wasn't either going well, or I'm with somebody and he's telling me this, that and the other, and it's not nice. Do you know what I mean? And then, if I go home and my wife doesn't know what I'm doing, then potentially she's thinking, well, what's wrong with you? Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, so it was one of them where I had to go through certain steps where I wanted my wife to sort of understand what I was thinking of doing. And you're right, we had 2 young children, and that in itself presents all sorts of problems and issues. And I thought to myself, no, like if Julie's okay, then I know at least then I know we're all right. And Julie's a very strong character, so Julie will certainly like keep me straight.
And what did she say? Was she 100% backing of your decision?
She was. She was worried about obviously me bringing stuff home, and I said no, that wouldn't happen. I would always try to create like little barriers where everything would be left at the office or the work or wherever I was deployed. Do you know what I mean? Sadly, there's times when I've got to have a phone. Whoever invented the phone, do you know what I mean? It was a nightmare because the mobile phone I had to have with me 24/7 because some of these individuals, they just phone you straight away and say, look, I want to do this. Do you know what I mean? And then that's your safety mechanism to sort of hopefully tell your operational team, look, something's going to happen tomorrow and we've got a plan and we've got to prep. Do you know what I mean? So there's times where, as much as I tried to keep everything at the office, there was times where I had to have it at home.
What year did you start this in?
This would have been 92.
And like I say, it wasn't as bad back then, what was it? Where it was more people were talking about it, was kind of swept under the carpet. How many, was it only 4 that joined that unit at that stage?
Yeah, if you can imagine, being an undercover officer, everyone loves buying the drugs and the guns and that excite because it's like adrenaline. But when you're actually sort of wanting to infiltrate a child sex offender, then talking about it's not really a talkable subject. No one wanted to talk about it. And a lot of people wouldn't want to do this work, A, because they were married, B, they had children, and C, they couldn't force themselves to actually speak to these people because they hated them. They didn't want to speak to them. So to do this work, I knew there was a lot of barriers I had to sort of overcome. And I think that was the challenge. The challenge was that I knew that not many people could do it, and that we were like a little family within a family, and we helped out each other.
What was the first job or assignment? How do you then build up relationships with sex offenders? How does that happen the first time?
Well, if I can say that the first thing I had to do was I had to look at images. And when you look at an image of a child, whether it's a naked child or whether it's a child that's subject of sexual abuse, it's not nice. But I had to look at it to train myself so that if someone showed me a picture or someone showed me a video, that I would hide my inner self where I don't like this, I don't want to see this. Do you know what I mean? And what I've got to do is I've got to look through the picture, look through the video, and literally block everything out and sort of have this acting role. Do you know what I mean? So you've got to take it so extreme, because if you think about it, if I can't deal with that image, then I would say that a predator would identify me, and who's to say I might put a child at risk. So we would always say, if you can't deal with images, you can't deal with it. So your first big hurdle are your images. And it's horrendous because you've got to keep looking at them. You've got to sort of have thought processes in your head to overcome sort of the nastiness of it. And your face has got to shut everything out. Do you know what I mean? Because they look at your face, your body language, and if they don't like what they see, that's it.
So if they were to show you videos, or fucking throat's getting dry listening, that's kind of rough to understand that. If someone's showing you videos or photos and you turn away, that's a sign that you're undercover or you're a journalist.
Yeah, I mean, it could be anything, but they certainly wouldn't like it, because if you're on one hand, you're saying I love children from a sexual point of view, and yet someone shows you a picture and you don't like looking at it. So that contradicts what you're wanting to be. So that's why it's so important. And then, of course, your hardcore stuff, your videos, the explicit, the screams of a child. I mean, it's horrendous. It's horrendous, James. Do you know what I mean? But at the end of the day, you have to train yourself to deal with that. If you can deal with that, that's fine. Then you've got to talk about it. Then you've got to talk about it sexually. So it's not just about seeing an image. Do you know what I mean? So an image could be in front of you for a while, whilst you're engaged with this individual.
And you've got to condition your mind to be calm
Yeah.
at those situations, or else you'll blow a cover and potentially.
Yeah. And you don't know when that image is going to come. Do you know what I mean? So they could just like drop it on you, or you might know it's going to happen, so you can like, do you know what I mean? Prepare yourself, but sometimes you don't, and it's just there. What do you think? Do you know what I mean? So
Who was the first kind of predator, sex offender you came across? When you knew that they were a sex offender and showing you those images and videos, what then's going through your mind? Were you ever thinking I could kill you, or were you trying to be as professional as you could be to then get to the bigger targets and try and expose more people?
Yeah, I think the biggest enjoyment I got from this was actually seeing them how they really were. Because when normal police go and interview them, they're just like a normal human being. When probation service speak to them, interview them, they're just a normal human being. When I see them, they are in their offending mode. They're switched on, and they are like a coiled spring. So I can actually see how they act at the height of when they're out there, when they're watching a boy or a girl, when they're in the street, when they're in a retail park, when they're on a beach. Do you know what I mean? When they're really switched on, that's how you see them as they really are. And when they're engaging, when they're talking to you quite explicitly about sex and stuff like that, that to me, I think that's brilliant, because I've actually managed to get into their environment, and I can actually see how they really are.
Could you go to a park or a swimming and notice paedophiles straight away?
I think sometimes you can. I mean, I think when you're with an individual and you go to a park, what I always say now to people is, wherever a child wants to go, then potentially a predator can be, because predators will always go where children are. So if it's a park, and if there's a train that goes around the park, or if there's a pond and they're feeding the ducks, that's a way of like communicating, whether it's to a parent or to an actual child itself. Retail parks are now, if you think most retail parks now, they cater for everything. So they cater for children, so children can go into shops and play games and stuff like that. They're so focused on playing the game that they're oblivious to their surroundings. So a predator can just get as close as possible. And there were certain predators that I were with that just wanted to get so close that they could potentially sort of like smell that child. Do you know what I mean? Because that's what really excited them.
What, to try and understand like sex offenders and predators, their methods, like, is a lot of them deranged? There's a lot of them quite smarter than what people give them credit for. Like you'll see these paedophile hunters videos, and they're quite, some of them ain't right in the head, where you see them and you think they're not right. Did you see that? Or was a lot of people you would never expect to be predators?
Yeah, I mean, I think the days are gone, and certainly when we started doing it, that it's like you have your own sort of stereotypical sort of person that you think is, but they might not necessarily be the person. I mean, when I was a kid growing up, my mum sort of gave me this description of a person that I had to keep well away from. Not because they were a sexual pervert or anything like that, but that was just that horrendous sort of picture. So I had a picture in my head of like what I thought was a dangerous person. Now, I would suggest when we started doing it, and even now, they come from all walks of life. So they can be professional people, non-professional, you name it. It's different now.
How did you get to build this trust? Like at the start, how did they approach you, or did you approach them? How does it work?
Right. If I give you an example, then, so most of the people I were up against were quite high risk, which means they'd been in prison, they'd come out, and it was a case of all your agencies were monitoring them and sort of like basically protecting the community, but they still have a right to be out in the public domain. So what they would do is they would sort of research them, they would follow them, build up a bit of a sort of like a pattern of where they go, and then it was down to me to basically work out, well, where is the safest place for me to engage and have a conversation with this individual, or initially to try and sort of speak to somebody and then sort of build that relationship. So for example, this particular one person went into a cafe and would always be there for around about half an hour-ish. And I knew that was a place where I had to literally go in. We did some more research because he had a particular phone. So I had the same phone. And then it was a case of like, I've got to use my personal skills to try and engage with him. So I go in there, very short. I just go in there. He's there. There's other people about. I had a carrier bag. I had a mobile phone, which was exactly like his. And I said, oh, would you mind just having a look at that whilst I get myself a cup of tea? And I know that when I was waiting for my tea, he was looking at the carrier bag. He saw the mobile phone. And when I came back, I then said, oh, I'm having a real problem trying to get me contact numbers on the phone. And I had a paper with all my contacts and stuff like that. They love to be in control. They love to be in charge of somebody. And they love to show that they've got, how can I say, sort of like knowledge and experience in something. So he grabbed the phone and he just entered all my numbers in the phone, and we started talking, all that sort of stuff. And then we build that relationship up, and then we carry on.
And once you start building that relationship, obviously it'll get darker, deeper, and the kind of the hell kind of begins. Like when you start getting through that, how do you train yourself to be calm in those situations? Once things, if you're talking about hearing kids screaming, I've got kids, so when you say that, it's in my mind thinking, fuck. Like, I understand that you've got to do that job, but how do you condition your mind to then to adapt to that?
Basically, you have to be professional, okay? Because I know that at the end of the day, if I do anything wrong, then the operation finishes, but then it paints me in a bad light. So I know that what I've got to do is I've got to remain calm. I've got to get the evidence, because I know that this is the one opportunity where his guard is down because he's comfortable with me. So it's a case of like, you've just got to, and again, you've got to be very careful with this, because at the end of the day, what you're doing is you've got to have a profile that he's going to ask you about. So I like boys between the ages of 7 and 10. What I've got to do is I've got to give examples of my offending behaviour and how I met those individuals and how I broke down their barriers and how I had sex with them. Because he wants to know that. Now, all what I say is a lie. Do you know what I mean? What he could tell me is a truth. So, but what I've got to be very careful is, because of the law, I've got to like only give him so much, and then he'll give me something, and then I might give him something else. If I keep feeding him with stuff, then potentially at court, they might turn around and say, well, look, you've overstepped the mark, and, we're going to throw the case out. Do you know what I mean? So you've got to be very careful how you drip stuff in.
And there's a lot of court cases. Do you think the sentences are a bit lenient? In my eyes, they're very lenient. People getting 2 or 3 years. I know people get done for so much less, like maybe drugs or whatever. Yes, drugs is bad, but I've seen friends getting 8 and 9 years for a bit of a coke or whatever, and then you're getting paedophiles out in fucking 2 years, and you're thinking, wait a minute, he's raped kids. I think there was a guy who had over 500,000 images of kids and get 12 months. And I'm thinking,
I think the problem is you've probably got, well, you can't put a figure on how many people are online, because I think online is a wash of it. It's so easy to get material. And because there's so many out there, you'll have all sorts of various organisations, police enforcement areas that are specifically looking at online investigations, that they'll be getting loads of people. But at the end of the day, there's not enough prisons. Do you know what I mean? So there'll be people with thousands and thousands of indecent images that ultimately, at the end of the day, probably would have gone to prison 20 years ago, but more than likely might not go to prison now.
because there's so many.
Because there's so many of them. And then that's just people who are online. There's a hardcore, and I think there's, even now, this is just my view, I think there is a lot of hardcore people out there who won't go near it online because they know that there's a good chance they might get caught. So they'll stick away from the computer. But they were doing that 20 years ago. There was many people I was up against that they would say, look, keep away from the computer because you're going to get caught. Keep away from it. So it was very much they like that face-to-face sort of element to it.
How many different levels of sex offenders are there? Or does it all come under the one kind of brush?
Well, I think all child sex offenders are all the same, because if you think about it, that all those that are online and are looking at images, that child at that image has been sexually abused. So that's a victim. And then you've got people who will, well, if you break it down, there'll be family abuse, so there'll be sexual abuse within the family, and then you'll have predators that will go out there and will befriend vulnerable women, and then they'll meet up with the children and rape the children, and then you've got your online. So there's just a wash of them. There's just so many of them.
What's the longest case you've worked undercover for?
I did a job that went on for about a year, but we were looking at different people, different types of people, and I was in and out, and there was one particular person that was very high risk, very dangerous, regarded as one of the worst ones about at that time, and he we managed to make disclosures to various people because he was getting very close. And we had to take that decision to sort of like make that disclosure.
So see when you're going on a case for a full year,
Yeah.
when you're 10 years deep into that job, how does your whole energy change? How does your whole persona change towards your wife, towards your kids? Like when you're going into the job at the start, you're probably loving it, getting a wage and thinking this is great, I'm catching criminals. But then when you go so far deep into the darkest side of the world you can ever go, how does that change everything in your life?
It does change you. It changes you as a parent. It makes you more aware of your surroundings and where you're going and where your children are, because it does change you. I think I had support when I started doing this work, which I think was important because I was able to sort of do the work I was doing, then speak to the psychologist, and he was able to look at me and sort of identify whether I needed to do anything to ensure that my family life was safe. Do you know what I mean? Because if you're spending 12 hours speaking to a predator and they're talking non-stop about child sex and how they break down the barriers of a child and how they do this, that, and the other, you're listening to this, and then suddenly you think, oh my God, like I'm listening to this for so long. Am I going to change? Do you know what I mean? And it was one question that I did say to the psychologist, because I said, like, I'm hearing so much stuff here. At the end of the day, like, am I going to change? And he said, you ain't going to change because you said you're different.
When you say change, actually become a predator yourself?
I think, you're worried that you're going to
start enjoying it.
Suddenly sort of enjoy what you're listening to and potentially look at your children in a different light. I mean, it's quite shocking, because you're thinking, oh my God, is it going to happen to me? But the psychologist would say at the end of the day, what you've got to understand is you've got to overcome so many barriers to get where they want to be. And when you get to the first barrier, which is basically, do I like children? You're going to say no, which is what I did. I said no. So it stops. Do you know what I mean? Whereas a predator, they'll knock down all these barriers to get where they want to be. And that's why they love it, because they'll knock down that barrier because they've seen a child that they want to have sex with. Now they've got to try and like get close to them, so they knock that barrier down, and so on and so on and so on.
Fuck's sake, to have those thoughts, and to think that you could have potentially be one.
Well, because I think at the end of the day, I think it's frightening purely because it was so full on. Do you know what I mean? And like you're listening to this all the time, and I knew I was comfortable. Do you know what I mean? But sometimes you need assurances.
Yeah, assurance.
I knew I was okay, no, I just think that, and I think what really helped was certainly from '92 onwards, we had this psychological mechanism support for undercover officers, and I think as time went on, that went for policing in general, and I think professional services are the same, because you do need support, because you could be affected by it. You'll have that vicarious trauma and all that sort of stuff, and you need that help.
So when you were in that, explain, what's a paedophile ring then for people who don't know? Is it people all connected everywhere, or what is it actually?
Right. Okay. So, well, in the paedophile world, there's no such thing as a paedophile ring.
Why does it get used? That term get used all the time.
I think a lot of it's down to sort of like the authorities. The authorities introduced what I would say as a ring, and then sort of paedophilia itself, and then obviously grooming. So those three terms were very much created by authorities as such. So a ring is actually a network, and what a network does is that they will identify each other, that they have a similar interest. So you might have, for example, you might have someone in Newcastle, you might have two people in Liverpool, and then you might have one person in London. What links them all together is that they all like girls between the ages of 7 and 10, for example. Now, they may well have met either in prison, out of prison, or where someone might be convicted, someone might not be convicted, but they've just built up this little bit of a connection. And then what happens is they will meet up together, and they will either share images, or they will either go to various places and visit. It used to be known as spotting. You go to a retail park with your fellow network, and then you would spot and you would look at particular children that suited your particular interest.
So when they're looking for kids at their interest, do they kidnap them, or what do they do?
I mean, sadly, there are people out there who, I always say that there's there's a few particular different types of predators. You've got one that wants that, they want to like identify a vulnerable woman who's got access to children. They want to spend time sort of befriending them. They want to spend time sort of like getting sort of having that sort of support, knowing that they are a trustworthy person. Once that wall of bricks has come round, and no matter who comes in and tries to knock those bricks down, saying, for example, Ian's not nice, Ian's not good, but they say, oh no, he's fine, he's good to me, he helps me, he gives me money, he gives me this, that, or the other. Then eventually, once they've identified that, then they move on to the child. Okay? If it takes a year, it takes a year, because it's the thrill of the chase. On the other side, you've got people who, I ain't got time for all that. I'm going to go out, and if I see somebody and I like them, I'm going to snatch them, I'm going to rape them, and then I've got this big problem. What am I going to do now because I've raped this child? Am I going to murder them? Am I not? You know, the example of Roy Whiting, you know, in Sussex, the Sarah Payne, quite a distressing case. But at the end of the day, you know, he just went out, he kitted his van out, he went out. She just sadly was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And yeah.
But that's what it is. People have got these needs that they're willing to just act on it straight away, whether they're snatching
But
kids.
I would say that whether you snatch a child, rape them, kill them, whether you spend a year sort of like befriending a parent and then moving on to the child, they're both equally as dangerous. Do you know what I mean? That it's just that one takes longer than the other.
So see, when you're kind of befriending these people and hearing these stories, and were you ever in that sort of situation where they said, right, I'm going to snatch a child today, or bringing childs to you?
Right. The time that really, I would say, and it's only ever happened once in the whole time I've been doing this in the country, and that was when I befriended somebody, and we eventually moved into a particular network. And when we moved into this network, on the day that I met these people for the very first time, and there were 6 of them, they brought a 12-year-old boy into the flat, and they wanted me to have sex with that boy.
So what happens there then? So
again, what you've got to do is you always think child safety, because if you think about it, James, if I allowed that boy to be sexually abused, what would the public think of me? You know,
you're no different.
I'm no different, am I? So I have a duty of care to that child. On the flip side, when I'm out and about spotting with a predator, I have a duty of care to that predator. Because if he's going to get assaulted by somebody, I have a duty, because he's in my presence. I'm a police officer. Do you know what I mean? So it's a difficult one. But certainly in a flat with a child, I have a duty of care to protect that child. Under no circumstances must anything happen to that child. And, you know, that's where all the pressure comes then, because you've got 6 men in there. Horrendous. Because I spent 6 hours in that flat. We were seeing images. They were analysing me. They wanted to know what I did, how I offended, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. And then they really are homed on to me. And then the more I sort of get accepted, more people were coming in. So I started off with 2 males, And then because I was getting on so well with them, and because I was comfortable with them, and they were comfortable with me, 6 males are there. Then suddenly the main guy gives me a tour of his flat and talks all sorts of sexual innuendo with what they do with the boy and all this sort of stuff. And then eventually he says, look, the boy's going to come into the flat and, you're going to be the first one that's going to have sex with him.
What? Kid at 12? Where did they get the kid at 12?
Because sadly, there's children out there who are vulnerable, who are targeted, who are sort of like...
Groomed?
Yeah, they're basically sort of, all their barriers are broken down, whether it's gifts, presents, whatever it might be. Do you know what I mean? So, and then the boy is there, and the boy is used to that environment. Yeah, which is the sad thing about it all, is you're expecting someone to come in who's going to be horrified, screaming and shouting, but there's no screaming or shouting because the boy, this was comfortable for him. This was his environment because he'd been so well sort of groomed.
A friend has actually just passed away. He released a book called Meat Rack Boy, where kids as young as 10 used to be in Soho and he used to just get into cars with men with suits, and they accepted that life because they were abused at 5 and 6 years old, where it became normal.
Yeah, and of course, sadly, in them days, they were known as rent boys, and because I know the particular area in Soho that was used, it was only like a very short couple of streets, but again, you had all sorts of people going there, picking people up.
So when you're put under that sort of pressure at that environment, how do you defuse the situation?
Right. Well, what happened with this particular one? We had a bit of a clue that a child might come into the flat. And that was introduced to me by the main guy that I met. And I met him on a bus for 20 minutes. This is how it all started. And then once we befriended and once we got on and various things developed, then as we're driving down, he tells me that I might be here a lot longer than I think because there's going to be a child coming to the flat. Now, I've got an operational team around me, so I sort of like create a sort of like a little bit of a delay mechanism because I need to tell them, look, there's just going to be a child coming into the flat, so we need to plan for when I say something, you've got to act on it. And the story I basically had was that I used to look after my mum and I was a carer, but if I'm going to be late, then I've got to make a call to get someone else to look after the care responsibilities. Do you know what I mean? So, and because I'd introduced that from the moment we're traveling down to actually in the flat with the main guy, and he tells me, like, we might have a surprise, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, I might have to tell, someone about my care responsibility. Oh yeah, we know all about that. So that's all natural. Do you know what I mean? So when I know the boy's going to come in, then it's about me creating the right time to actually say what I want to say to the operational team in full view of all the suspects, and then hope that they can get to me. So it's all about timing. It's all about, I make the call, the child's going to come in. Thankfully, the main guy ushers the boy to me. He's got his arm around me. I've got my arm around him. So I know he ain't going anywhere. I know I'm protecting him because I have a duty of care to that boy. And then what I've got to do then is just delay everything, slow everything down so that as time goes on, I know the police are going to come in the house. Now, that's where the pressure is like, it's through the roof, James. It's through the roof because I've got 6 predators there who are absolutely... they've gone. Do you know what I mean? They're sexually sort of so perverse and active. We'd spent 6 hours looking at all these sort of child images. The computer's awash of material. I've got evidence all over the floor and all this sort of stuff. And yet at the end of the day, I've got to hold this boy and I've got to protect this boy. I can't take back. Sadly, I can't take back what's happened to the boy previously. Do you know what I mean? It's the here and the now. I've got to... all I know is that whilst I'm here, no one's going to touch him and that he's safe. But then it's a cat and mouse game because at some point I've got to make a decision because if the police don't come, then I've got to come out of wrong. So I've got to come out of role and say, right, okay, people, just to let you know, I'm a police officer and you're all under arrest.
Is that how?
No. No, but that's what's going through your head. Going through your head is, I've got to save the boy, I've got to protect him, no one's going to touch him, the police know about it, the police are coming, why aren't they here? Because time just everything slows down, and it's like, and no matter how I try to create the actual incident in the book, really didn't do it justice, because if I said how it really was, I don't think anyone would have read it.
That fucking poor boy, man.
Yeah.
12 years old.
So, and then of course the police come in, and then it's like, it's a relief, isn't it? It's a relief that the police have come in, everything gets protected, boy gets taken away, and that's it. But your head, I can't. It was fantastic being in that environment purely because I was seeing these people how they really were. Do you know what I mean? Evil people who have no real sort of like compassion for children.
Remorse, nothing.
No, nothing. They just want to have sex with this boy. Do you know what I mean? So it was. I know it sounds awful, but it was great to be in that environment to actually see how they really were, because I knew how they really were. They were dangerous. They were horrendous people. And really, at the end of the day, I knew what kept me going was the fact that I know that you're all going to get locked up.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So that's what keeps you going. And then, of course, if you save one child, which obviously is the purpose of the book, you save one child, then it becomes an obsession. You want to save more. Do you know what I mean? You feel as though, well, hold on a minute, I've been in the most horrendous situation. I know I can do this. Do you know what I mean? And that's what keeps you going.
Yeah, I can kind of understand that bit, that you've seen a 12-year-old kid where you've saved them from being raped from grown adults, where you think, if you walk away now, how many more kids have you let that happen to? Then you sort of blame yourself, because I'm trying to understand the method of thinking of going back to that madness and that evilness.
Yeah, I think because what it is you save one child and you think, do you know what, I can do this because I've just done it. Mm-hmm. So I know that this is worst case scenario, and this has never happened since. So in England and Wales, we've never had this situation before, and it's worst case scenario. It's an investigated officer's sort of nightmare to have like a child in a flat, and you've got an operation going. Like, when are we going to like arrest them? You know, because we don't want anything to happen to the child
Or you.
or me. Yeah, but child comes at the top.
First, yeah, of course. What about, how much evidence do you need to gather, first of all, to get a conviction or to take it to court? If it's like, if somebody says I'm sexually attracted to kids, or they've got all the evidence, that's not enough to convict someone?
Not necessarily, no, because at
Why
the end
is that?
Well, I think certainly prior to 2003, the legislation that we had and we had to work with was quite poor. And I think most people within the judicial system would probably support that. And there was a lot of campaigning, a lot of planning, because they knew that they had to deal with all sorts of things relating to child sexual activity, whether it's sex tourism, whether, and 2003, when you're looking at grooming and facilitating and taking photos and then sort of like supplying them, possession of them. All we had back in the day was the Vagrancy Act of 1824, which basically said that if you're a public nuisance, then we can arrest you. Or we've got 1956 Sexual Offences Act. Do you know what I mean? Which were very limited.
So see, when you're getting convictions, do you have to give evidence at court? Are you still behind a screen? Do they know who you are then?
Yeah, well, at times I had to give evidence, and at times I'd either be behind a screen or I'd do a video link. So yeah, but that is part and parcel of the job, really. You know, you should expect that you might have to go to court, that you should have to go to court. And I used to love the fact that I could go to court, because I could basically paint a picture to say like what they really were. I used to wear technical equipment as well, which is another big thing.
What do you mean?
Well, being recorded. So if I've got recording on me, then the risk is ramped up even more, because they are very touchy-feely people. So
Towards you as well.
oh yeah, so they might touch me in a way of like trying to work out whether I've got any like recording equipment on me. So but I used to purposely wear technical equipment because it would protect me, but it also protects them in a way because like I can't say anything that is untoward. Do you know what I mean? So and not only that, it would reduce me potentially spending so many days in a witness box at court.
When you're coming across these people and they're giving you information that kind of the kids that they like, from kids I'd imagine weeks old to 12 to 13, like how do you go from staying calm to then understand that you need to get a conviction? Like, I'd imagine, was there any times you ever felt like crying when people were telling you the shit things that they done, or did you just
I
become
think
so cold?
it goes back to when you join the police. When you join the police, they always say that your job stops when you actually go to court. You give your evidence and that's it. You have no control over what a person gets for a sentence. Because if you did, you would you literally go potty, because there'll be times when you think, oh, I've got a case that's nailed on, and they don't go to prison. You'll have another case that, well, I ain't going to get a result, and you get a result and they go to prison. Do you know what I mean? So so really when you come to sort of being professional, you be professional, you take it as far as you can, you go to court, you give your evidence, and that's it. It's out of your hands. You have no control over the jury, you have no control over the judge. And really at the end of the day, they get what they get. Now, that particular group I mentioned in the flat, I think they got between 4 and 7 years. They did half of that, I think, and then they came out and they carried on again. So that's an established network that ain't going to stop. They're not going to stop, and they don't stop.
So what should be put in place to, do you lock them up longer? Do you cut off their balls? Do you like, I know they do that in America, they chemically castrate, but
it doesn't really
do anything. But so what should be in place then for, is that a psychological thing that can never be fixed, or what's your whole outlook of it all that could try and improve that to keep kids protected, or do you think it's just going to get worse?
I don't think you're going to stop it. And I don't think it's something that, you're going to say, do you know what, we're going to wipe this all out and it's never going to happen again. It's a bad dream. But it isn't. It's going to be there, and it will be there for life, forever. So what we've got to do is, I think certainly my view is, I think it's a lot about awareness and prevention. It's about educating parents, because sadly, there's a lot of parents out there who are vulnerable, and potentially they're the ones who are more at risk, because they've got something that a predator wants, which is a child, and what they've done is they've probably been in all sorts of sad sort of circumstances, which means that they are very much now vulnerable and more likely to be targeted by a predator. So it's a case of like making them aware that, be mindful of dating sites, be mindful of online, whatever the online site is. It could be problem parenting, it could be, bad parenting, advice on children, that type of thing. They infiltrate these sort of networks to try and identify a parent that's got a child that fits their profile. So when I'm with these predators, I will have a profile for a boy, or I'll have a profile for a girl. I'll have various ages or whatever, because I know that I have to mirror that to them, because otherwise they're not going to talk to me. Do you know what I mean? So
So the predators aren't just going after the kids, they're grooming the parents to get to the kids, and that's a process that they're willing to go through because it's a chase for them.
So it is.
That's fucked up, man.
I mean, sadly, you've got those that haven't got time for all that, but at the end of the day, it's like anything. We want our children to basically live their lives, to enjoy life, to experience life. But sometimes we have to be very careful, because it's like putting them on a rope. If we let them go off and we don't know where they are, do you know what I mean? It's difficult to pull the rope back, because at the end of it, they might not be at the end of the rope. Do you know what I mean? They've gone.
Why are they so well protected, though, predators? Why are they not? Why should you not be in a database that who's round you and who stays near you and who's in the schools, and like, they're so well protected? It's kind of sickening in a way.
Well, it's a lot better now, James, than what it was. Yeah, because you've got Sarah's Law. So Sarah Payne, basically, sadly, because of her death, her parents campaigned for Sarah's Law, which was basically sort of the right for families to know that there might be a predator living in the street. Do you know what I mean? So you've got that, and it's very much, it works on a par with Clare's law, which is again that domestic violence sort of like awareness. So there's a lot more organisations out there. The schools are very switched on, and you've got Bernardo's and SPCC. So there's loads of organisations out there, and self-organisations as well, where you've got, say, parents of victims who want to help other victims. Do you know what I mean? So they've created like groups and stuff like that. So there's lots of opportunities for children to make more disclosures, for professional people to sort of like really understand what's going on. Whereas I think back in the day, there wasn't that. And if you look at all the people now, for argument's sake, if you've got people within the church area, professional people, teachers, doctors, police, within the hospital arena as well, they were all people upstanding that people would look at, and what they said was true. Do you know what I mean? But there are predators hidden within those circles. There's predators hidden everywhere. But now I think there's more organisations out there. And I think what's made a real difference as well is that the Jimmy Savile investigation, as much as it had probably a lot of pitfalls and a lot of problems, you had people that wanted to come out and say what was wrong, that they had been sexually abused. The sad thing about it, they couldn't do it when he was alive, because if you think about it, you're talking about an individual who had awards, he had friends in government, he would raise millions of money, do you know what I mean? Well respected. And then you had victims who, sadly, through being abused, had all sorts of complexities. So who are you going to believe? Someone with those complexities, or are you going to believe Jimmy Savile? Do you know what I mean? So once Jimmy Savile had gone, then you didn't have that problem. And not only that, you had over 1,000 people. Now, all these 1,000 people that came forward and said that they were abused, they didn't know each other. Do you know what I mean? So there's no sort of like collusion. These are like...
Yeah, thousands of people's different than somebody coming forward.
And I think it made a difference. And I think then suddenly it was a wake-up call. And I think... Sadly, I know that there were individuals that probably were caught up in this that probably weren't offending. Do you know what I mean? So there's always that danger. But at the end of the day, it was on a positive note, yeah? The victims could now come out and have a voice. It's like your child sexual exploitation cases. You know, a lot of these kids were vulnerable, missing from home, had all sorts of problems, and no one believed them.
I had Barbara O'Hare on, who was in the... She released the book The Hospital, The Horrors at Aston Hall. The doctors had a checklist, kids from vulnerable homes, addiction issues, because what happens is, used to sign the kids off as crazy. So when the kids used to run away and go to the police station, the police actually took the kids back because they were already signed off as mentally unstable. So it was just a checklist. So they were drugging the kids, experimenting on them, killing them, raping them, like some sick shit. And people need to understand this stuff goes on. You've lived it firsthand. Like, how can we educate people, the people that's watching now, for telltale signs, maybe at the park, at the swimming, or out with schools? How do we, what's the telltale signs where people can maybe, there's red flags, is there any?
Well, I would say any parent that meets somebody online, just think before you start sort of like really engaging. Always try to, I know it's difficult, but always try to take a step back. You know, if someone wants to give you a top-up voucher for your phone, for argument's sake, you know, how many people realistically want to give you a top-up voucher for your phone? The only reason why they do it is because they want you to be hooked to them. All right? If I give someone £20 and it's a top-up for their phone, then they're more likely to phone me because I've taken the and it's not only that, it shows me in a good light as well, because I'm prepared to give my last £20 to them. Yeah? So just be mindful of, and again, what they'll do is they'll test them. So they want to go to the shops for 10 minutes. Well, you go and I'll look after the child. They're quite cute. They won't go anywhere near the child. When mum comes back, there's no problem. Mum wants to go into town for an hour, comes back, no problem. They build it up, they build it up. So just be a little bit mindful and careful. Do you know what I mean? And if someone questions it, then ask them, why are you questioning it, rather than dismiss it. You know, why do you think there's something wrong with him?
What about kids who are on things like TikTok and Facebook and
Yeah.
stuff like that? I know that's a prime example for grooming kids is TikTok. I know I
I
spoke
think
to a few people.
any online services with children now, unfortunately now, I think
It's too big now, isn't it? Stop.
it's far too big. And I think with children now, children are far more sexually aware. But sadly, it's easier for them to be groomed as well because of that sexual awareness.
What do you think about them trying to bring the age of consent down for sex in the UK from 16? I think even some talks of 12.
Right. Well, back in the day,
100 years ago, it used to be 10, 12. They changed it now, but then they're trying
well,
to bring it down again.
certainly in Europe, there are countries where you can have sex with a child with a certain age, and you can actually marry a child at the age of 9 in Africa and stuff like that. So, when we were in the European Union, there was a hardcore set of individuals who wanted to lower the age of consent, and they were campaigning it purely on the basis of, well, if we're in the European Union, we should all be one. So, and if you think about it, back in the day, it was 21, then it went to 18, then it went to 16. So there's campaigners out there who are always trying to look at opportunities to lower the age of consent. Now we're out of the European Union, obviously that might go. Do you know what I mean? So there's always there are a set of hardcore predators out there who are always looking at ways of trying to manipulate the law, manipulate sort of opportunities to try and be accepted. You will never have a predator who will probably say to you, "I'm sorry for what I do." They're not sorry. What they'll do is they'll look at themselves and they'll blame everybody apart from themselves. So they'll blame the child because the child will have hot pants on or a short skirt. Do you know what I mean? They'll always look for an excuse to blame the other person, to say, well, they were encouraging it, et cetera, et cetera. Never what they wanted.
Did you ever speak to the predators after they got a conviction to ask why or to ask?
No.
Never?
No. There was times when I had to go back in and speak to people because we wanted to know what was going on within the group and stuff like that. But no, I never spoke to them.
Did you ever did you ever keep tabs on them when you knew they were coming back out? Or did you have to move to a different area because then your cover would be blown? How does it work, Ian?
Yeah, I mean, I had to move on. I mean, some of the places I actually had to go into a prison and meet a predator there. And you can imagine the sort of complexities. I'm going into a prison. I'm going to have, like where they have their meetings. And I'm meeting someone in prison, which at the end of the day, the problems there is that, well, they don't like predators. And yet I'm supposed to be like a sympathizer, or I could be one. And I'm actually meeting someone who's convicted. Do you know what I mean? So you can imagine all the sort of like potential hostility and all that sort of stuff. So there's that arena, and then you've obviously got opportunities that I meet other people. But yeah.
Did your life ever come under any threat when you were undercover?
No. The only threat I had was potentially, because again, potentially you've got an opportunity to be sexually assaulted, because some of them will have a sexual sort of like behaviour where they'll have sex with a male. Doesn't mean anything, but it's just their sort of like their condition. They just want to have sex. So there's always a danger that someone's going to try it on with you and whatever. So what you got to do is you got to sort of negate that, which is easier said than done, because if someone comes onto you and starts stroking your leg, and you've got to push them away and say, look, you're not my type. That's a carrot. It's a carrot, because they'll be thinking, well, he's okay in this particular area because it's an homosexual gay bar, but at the end of the day, he doesn't like me. So who does he like? Do you know what I mean? So that keeps the operation going. I can't hit him. Do you know what I mean? I can't, because if I hit him, then that's it. Job's finished. So it's a case of dealing with that situation. I spent a weekend with an individual, and there's always a danger of, well, even when I go into that flat, am I going to be drugged? There's always a danger of that. There is a realistic danger of that. So your sort of issues are, yes, I could be drugged. Yes, I could be raped. Yes, I could be sexually assaulted. Yes, someone could take my picture, which they did on a particular job. They took my picture because someone wanted to see who I was before they met me. And, you know, you have to deal with that. I mean, how are you gonna deal with that? You know, someone takes your picture, it's downloaded, it's on the internet, it's gone.
So everybody's kind of sitting in the same house, all kind of connected. Is that a lot? Is there a lot of this happening than people actually expect?
Well, I think, I mean, I think it's still going on. I don't think it's just online. I think there's people working face to face and all that sort of stuff because they don't like online. So it's still going on. But yeah, but for me to do this work, I can only say that, you know, like, because I had to go through so many hoops and so many barriers and all that sort of stuff, it's not easy.
What about the child trafficking stuff? Was people ever offered to sell you kids?
No. But I mean, again, I mean, human trafficking and modern slavery, I mean, it's rife, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's so sad to think that people are paying money and not necessarily getting to the end. Do you know what I mean? You know, they might lose their life en route to where their dreams are. And then when they eventually get to where they think their dream is, it's a different life.
How did everybody else who was working on this, how did all the other agents get on with it, the ones you started with? Did they last the pace or did they quit?
No. We all naturally lasted our pace, and then eventually, you know, like, we left. The person that introduced me to this sadly died a couple of years ago. And the others are still about. I mean, obviously, I don't know where they are, but yeah, we lived to, do you know what I mean? Our shelf life, which is, we did our service and that was it.
How much do you try then protect your kids when they start hitting their teens and like going from 9, 10, 11, 12, 13? Like, how paranoid do you become? Do you get to loosen the reins a bit and let them a little bit of freedom, or just totally wrap them in cotton wool?
Well, obviously, my children now are like, they're grown up. They're grown up, so, and they're away. But it does change you, James. Do you know what I mean? You know, I'd be lying to say that, well, it doesn't. You have a different outlook. Yeah, you're more observant about if you go to a beach. Do you know what I mean? You might go to a beach and there might be a bit of a promenade and you'll see loads of people on the promenade and they've all got their cameras in their hand. Well, why have they got their cameras in their hand? Are they a tourist, or are they taking pictures of children on the beach? Do you know what I mean? So you do become more aware. And again, it's like your surroundings, you know, just going to retail parks, going to like tourism places. Yeah, you're just so far more aware of your surroundings, of where your children might be.
There's a lot of the kids you saved didn't know who you were.
No, they wouldn't have known who I was. They wouldn't have known who I was. And some of them wouldn't have even known that potentially they were victims. You know, so sadly, the 12-year-old boy, I don't know who he is. I don't know where he is. He might be a predator now. Do you know what I mean? Or he might be married. He might have children, whatever. Yeah.
There's a lot of these predators. There's a lot of them abused as kids themselves, or
not necessarily.
Because I know people say that.
Yeah, sometimes people will say, well, you know, like, they were abused and they think it's the norm. And they think, well, this is what happens in life. This is what I should be doing.
Still have choices, though.
They have choices. They have choices. When you're born, from the moment you're born upwards through life, you have a choice to do what you do. So you're not born with it, you know. So I know people say that, well, you must be born a child sex offender, you know, but you're not. You know, predators basically have a liking for children. And you'll find that they will be more comfortable talking to a child than what they would be potentially talking to an adult. It will all be like a little bit muzzy. Whereas when they were a child, they can communicate well, they feel comfortable, and so that's where that's where their niche is.
Did anybody ever come forward to you and tell you that obviously they're predators, but they would like to get help, or is it just no one ever admitted to that what they're doing is wrong?
No, I mean, no. Well, first off, they would never ever say they've done anything wrong. because they
Not one.
no, because they don't see it as wrong. Okay, they like children because they are affectionate to children. They educate children. They spend more time with children. They can communicate with children. Yes, they have sex with children, but that's all part of education. That's their rationale. All right. So no one's going to turn around and say, "Do you know what? No, I shouldn't be doing this."
How hard is that to see the broken kids, to see the nightmares that they're living? Like, I'd imagine that's the worst thing of being in that job, to see kids.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, if you look at the CSE world, the child sexual exploitation world, you've got children out there who basically, because they get targeted at a young age, say about 10 or 11, and as they get older, they suddenly feel as though, do you know what, they see this like green light where they think, do you know what, I want to stop this. And then, but suddenly they don't want to lose what they have, which is your gifts, your presents, your clothes, cash, iPhones, iPads, whatever it might be. But they love the predator, which means that if they walk away from it and they go back to family life, they probably might not have anything. They might have one present a year. So you've got that problem, which means that at the end of the day, with predators, what they'll do is, and this has a flip side, because you'll have a predator that likes boys 7 to 10. When that boy reaches 10 and their development and they're moving on, then predators will literally, what they'll do is they'll hold on to that 10-year-old because they've worked hard to break down the barriers of that child. And then what they'll do is they'll use him to facilitate younger boys to come in. Okay, so they keep it going. So with CSE, again, what you'll do is you'll have girls, 11, 12, whatever, they'll suddenly get to about 16, 17, where they've had enough of all the complexities and all the problems that they've had, that suddenly now they want to take a step back and be a facilitator to bring younger children in.
Did you ever feel as if you were fighting a lost cause because it's so rife out there, Ian?
Well, I mean, you can't stop it. I think that the satisfaction I had was that, and it became a bit of an obsession, because you save one child, then you want to save another one, then you want to save another one. Do you know what I mean? And probably, dare I say it, because of the legislation, we probably were far more successful saving children than what we were getting convictions. Do you know what I mean? So that's what kept you going. Is the fact that you had an opportunity to save children.
How does your wife then, when you were in that job for 20 years, does that relationship break down, or does it just total try to support each other the best as you could? How does that work?
My wife was strong. My wife was a rock, and she means a lot to me. And I owe a lot to her. Because at the end of the day, I'm doing what I'm doing, and Julie is keeping the family together, and Julie's running the house and everything like that. So, yeah.
If she never supported you, do you think you'd have been in that job?
I wouldn't have done that job, because I made that decision from day one that if my wife wasn't comfortable with me doing it, then I would walk away from it. Do you know what I mean? Because I genuinely felt that I needed the support of my wife to, and I desperately tried to make sure that I didn't bring things home. Do you know what I mean? And there was the odd occasion when it did happen, but generally speaking, I wanted to sever it and keep it split.
What about making friends and stuff when you're in that line of work? Did you have many friends, or did you become so distant towards people, or did you, when you were in their environment, did you also question that they could be predators? Does you question everybody being a predator?
Well, I mean, I think that certainly in the undercover world, we became a family within a family, because we very much depended on each other. We learnt from each other. And they were good characters. I mean, the guy that really introduced me, he was a lovely fella, but I knew him when I was in the Met Police, and he was a really nice guy, and he taught me a lot, gave me a lot of advice, and yeah, so we very much depended on each other, and we would. There was times when we went to Romania and Holland and the Czech Republic and places like that. But we went there for a reason. We went there because predators were telling me, this is where I go, this is what I do, etc., etc. So again, it's about building up that credibility, because that's what you had to do.
Did you ever break down at any moment, Ian?
No, I didn't break down because I had a good support mechanism around me. The flat, I'd be telling a lie if the flat job affected me in so much as, because it was horrendous, it wasn't nice, but again, because I had that support mechanism around with me, I was able to sort of like talk it through. And then I did various presentations in the future, which again helped me as an individual, because I was able to sort of like promote what we did to try and get other people to come in and do what we did. But we could never get people to come in and do what we did because they just didn't want to do it.
Why do you think a lot of people reject? You can understand why, in fact, why a lot of people would reject that.
Of course you could. And I think you've got to respect their wishes. You can't, people don't want to do it because they don't want to like be in the company of them, because they don't like speaking to them. They've got children themselves, like I said before. They've got all these reasons why they don't want to do it. And you have to respect them for it. And I certainly wouldn't hold a grudge against anyone who doesn't want to do it. I'd rather have someone who wants to do it because they feel as though they can do it. Do you know what I mean? Rather than someone who's being forced to do it. Because again, if you're forced to do something, it's not really in you, and you could be caught out and stuff like that.
Yeah, you'd want somebody to do it for the right reasons to try and make change.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think a lot of people could use that job, though, as predators themselves, as a get out to see the things that you've seen to cover up their own tracks?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, when I go back to what I think I said earlier about predators can come from all walks of life. There are predators within the police service. There has been. It's been well documented. So they are in that profession. Do you know what I mean? So, God forbid there isn't anyone. Well, certainly I don't know of anyone in the undercover world, but I'm out of it now and I've gone. But certainly within the police service, and certainly there's been officers that have investigated child abuse investigations, and they've been predators. So, do you know what I mean? It is what it is, sadly.
There's predators in every field.
Every field.
Do you know what I mean? They say, I've said this many times on the podcast before, but they say there's one in every fair that's got paedophile tendencies. So that's one in every street where your kids are basically in danger.
It's believable, isn't it? It is believable. But sadly, I think that's what it is. What we've got to try and do now, I think, and there's loads of organisations out there, certainly like Barnardo's and NSPCC, they do a lot of sort of preventative work. They do a lot of work sort of identifying children that may be at risk, trying to get them off the streets, because, that's where potentially they can be at risk. And there's loads of organisations out there who are prepared to listen to children, speak to children, educate children. So
your book, Save a Child, was it 2016, 2017? When did that get
2018. It got published in November 2018. And I got a lot of pleasure from it, mainly because there was a lot of education within it. So there was a lot of advice about, just being mindful and awareness for parents. Because I do think there are two victims in all this. There's always a parent, potentially, and a child. I made a big decision to sort of like come out into the open world. So when I retired from the police way back in, seems ages now, 2011, I would give talks to foster agencies and organisations about sort of like being mindful of sort of the grooming issues and predators themselves. And then Tazeen Ahmed, who was a freelance journalist who did a lot of work with Channel 4 dispatches, did a lot of work within the CSE element to it, very passionate about what she did. We spoke, and she wanted me to sort of do a particular piece where we were doing some awareness for parents. And it was a big thing. And I thought, well, this is massive because no one knew what I did. No one knew who I was. And now suddenly I was going to...
Yeah. Your book for every mum and dad is a book you don't want to read, but a book that they should read to get a bit more knowledge and a bit of understanding of the red flags, of the grooming, of how people can be manipulated. That it's not a case of predators going for kids, they go for the parents, try and break them down to getting in with the kid. It shows you the levels and the extremes that people go to.
Yeah, it's a snapshot of certain work I did which just highlights the potential of risk.
How do you feel now, being at the forefront now with your face being out there? Do you worry about any risk or retaliation, or do you feel strong enough to just go with it now?
I feel comfortable with it. I mean, it's a massive decision, James. Do you know what I mean? Because you know what I mean. No one knows who you are, and then suddenly you're gonna come out. And I never really had any negative press about it.
Rightly so, though.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm comfortable. Everything's been okay.
Yeah. Going forward for the future, Ian, like, what's your plans?
Well, at the moment, I teach detectives on training courses, which I enjoy. I really enjoy. If any opportunities come up in the future, then yeah, it'd be great to sort of like do presentations and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think, like, I take my hat off to you for being so brave to do the job that you do. I know these subjects, a lot of people don't want to hear about that. A lot of people don't want to talk about it, but it's a subject that must be get spoke about, because at the end, this could help potentially save kids, that people could actually have alarm bells now, where they can maybe recognise something that they wouldn't recognise before, and have a better understanding of how dark these people kind of work. That for you to do that job, listen, man, it's a brave job, and you've helped save so many kids and helped put a lot of predators in prison. So I respect you for that, brother. But for people watching, though, what advice would you give for them, or maybe they're totally oblivious at who's come into their life or where their surroundings are? What's it, like, any concrete telltale signs?
Well, I mean, I would just because it's all on an individual basis. But if you want to be generalised, just be mindful where you're going to meet someone, how you meet them. If it's an internet, if it's a site, then just be mindful what you're actually saying. And the trigger is, if they start making an interest in wanting to know whether you've got any children, then that's a flag. That's a red flag. Because if you have no children, then potentially they might not come back to you. But because you've got a child, then that's the hook. That's what they want to go.
How do you sleep in that now, Ian?
Fine, because it's gone. What I've done is gone.
Shut that off.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for people to understand that for me to have had to do this work, I've had to work very hard to deal with all sorts of stuff, and it's not easy, because I'm telling a lie. Like, I'm not a predator, and yet I'm portraying myself as a predator. I've got all sorts of hobbies and interests, and I've got me profiles for me potential victims, but it's all a lie, and I've got to maintain that lie. So it's not easy trying to get into that world, and it's a secret world. So yeah, I enjoyed what I did. I saw them for what they really were. I was pleased with the results that we got. It was good. And I was fortunate enough to get an award at the end of it, which you don't plan for awards, but at the end of the day, I got an award. So yeah, it was good, and it was great for the family, because it's recognition from the family, really, more than anything.
Yeah, but I think you deserve more than an award for putting you through that misery. You'll probably hear and see things in your mind that you probably try and block out, but till the day you're on this earth, like,
yeah.
The sad thing is, somebody had to do that job. You're willing to put yourself at the forefront, even though probably thousands have been asked to do it and they've all declined, and you can understand why also.
And I think it's important to respect their wishes as well. Do you know what I mean? Because they will find their own niche, what they feel as though they're good at, and quite rightly so. And as I said, and they would have to work hard at whatever they were going to do. Do you know what I mean? So yeah.
Because that stuff there could potentially turn into like a 6-part series or a documentary, just highlighting what you've went through and highlighting the telltale signs that could potentially help other people. So for anybody watching, I'll maybe leave a link where you can get in contact with Ian. I don't know if you want that, but for people maybe even speaking around schools and educating parents, like stuff like that, just to try and, like, that information is valuable to them, help potentially save a fucking kid. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I think everyone should also just be mindful. You've got organisations out there, and I know I keep saying about Bernardo's and the NSPCC, but they've got loads of educational links out there. And I think people have just got to, do you know what I mean? Just take the time to look at these links. And yeah, you know.
Do you still do counselling just now, Ian?
No.
Nah, you feel better?
No. As I said, you know, that world is gone. That world, you know, that's finished now. I enjoy what I do. You know, the book, I think it was a hard decision to do the book, because again, it's a subject that perhaps people don't want to read. And I didn't want to glorify what I did. I wanted people to really understand just how difficult it is and how hard it is. And I still think it's relevant now, even though we've moved into this online world. There are predators out there. So, you know, it's not just about online. You've got to be careful online and look about all the children now with technology and online. You know, there's more likelihood now of children being abused now than ever before because it's so easy.
Yeah. It's on a global scale now.
Yeah.
Look at
But no,
Epstein and all that kind of stuff where they've got islands and fucking doing all sorts of dark stuff. Like it's no, that world is gone. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, no, it's good. Just before we finish up, brother, would you like to finish up on anything yourself, or maybe it's anybody that's watching?
I mean, obviously, it goes without saying, my wife, Julie, she's been phenomenal for me, and my family as well. My children never really knew what I did, and they didn't know until even when I went to Buckingham Palace and got the award. They couldn't understand why I was getting an award. You know, like why, you know, like you're a policeman. You know, why are you getting this award? So they never really knew until much later when I wanted to come out and be a little bit more open, and then I told them about it, and yeah, so they were proud of me. So. And again, really, he's not with us now, but the person who put me into this world, I owe a lot to him because he saw something that he thought I could do, which I did, and hopefully I did it justice.
Yeah.
But I would like to also pay a particular thanks to perhaps people who were working with me from an operational point of view, who had the patience and mindset and support, and also the psychologist.
Yeah, that's important to get it all out there and talk to somebody about it. Last question. So, see, when you during the day you're a predator, at night you need to be a father. How do you totally adapt? Does that become like a split personality, like a job to then switch off?
Yeah, I mean, I used to try. What I used to do was I used to try and come back home at every opportunity. Because by the time I came home, I was gradually coming down. So when I walked through the door, I was Ian. Do you know what I mean? And like I'd left everything else else behind me. And that's how I sort of dealt with it, really. Yeah. Because what you've got to do is you've got to say, right, I'm an actor, and I've done this role, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to park that where it is, and now I'm going home, and home is reality. Home is real. Being a predator is just false. It's just acting.
So you have to have a rush home and just cuddle your kids and just tell them how much you love them because you are concerned that it could potentially happen to them, and they must have been thinking, why?
You're always, I think you're always worried about your family. You know, you become protected of your family, yeah. So, yeah.
Ian, for coming on today and telling your story, it's been a roller coaster. My head is pounding, if I'm honest, but it's a story that needed to be told. You're a true hero to many people. I know a lot of people might not understand the job that you took on, but people with kids will understand that you were there to protect kids, you were there to save kids, you were there to put the evilness of this world in prison, which you've done, and you got the award, you've got your book, and hopefully many other doors open for you to try and educate people of actually what's going on. But fair play to Ian, and I wish you all the best for the future.
Thank you, James. Thanks very much.